actually were LGBTQ. We know that it's actually Pride in San Francisco, so if you are part of the community, thanks for being with us. Thanks for sacrificing a few hours of drinking to join us for this. With that in mind, what we're going to try to do with this discussion actually is keep it pretty open. We'll talk about LGBTQ information, certainly, but we also want to talk broadly about just MBA diversity initiatives that we're seeing within schools and companies, and we can talk about it that way, so it's maybe a little bit more relatable if you're not part of the community. And then talk about just in general why diversity is important and relevant and why we're having discussions like this. So as a bit of an introduction, we'll kind of go down. My name is Matt Kidd. I'm the Executive Director of Reaching Out MBA. Reaching Out MBA is the now global association for LGBT identifying MBAs. We're best known for what's called the RAMBA conference. So it's our annual conference that happens in the fall. A lot of it's structured around recruiting for students, but that's about a 1,400 person conference. That's been happening for 20 years now. So it's kind of impressive to see how that's grown over the years. But also have a lot of other programs, including the RAMBA Fellowship or LGBT MBA Fellowship, which is a scholarship and leadership development program that as of this coming academic year, the schools participating in it will be giving the fellowship recipients about $2.5 million per year. So it's a pretty significant program that we've done with the schools. So with that, I'd actually like to introduce our other panelists here, who consist of two students that are currently enrolled and participate in some of our initiatives, as well as one alum. And then we'll jump into a conversation.
Cool. I'm Sean. I'm at MIT Sloan, going into my second year, and I'm actually in San Francisco now, doing an investment banking internship.
I'm Sarah Johnson. I'm at Cornell, first year MBA. Actually found out about going to business school through Reaching Out MBA. So very excited to be here with Matt. And I'm interning here in San Francisco at Genentech.
I'm Vivian. I graduated from Wharton, class of 2015. I was a student organizer for RAMBA my second year, and I currently work as a product manager in technology. Prior to business school, I was an investment banker and an investor.
So I'm going to start with a couple questions, and then I want to actually try to keep it fairly interactive here. But I'm going to start with a question that I'd like each of you to answer, and it's a question I get all the time, which is, okay, I'm going to business school. What does identifying as LGBT, what does that matter? Why is it important? Why should anybody know? How is it germane to what I'm going to go through for the next couple of years? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a pretty simple answer. You go to business school for exposure. At least that's one of the things you're ideally looking for. And so, you know, your classmates are bringing something to the table. Admissions is trying to gather, you know, this demographic profile. And I almost think it's incumbent upon you to kind of open up and share yourself with your classmates, hoping that they'll reciprocate that, and you have the opportunity to kind of learn from each other and about each other, and kind of broaden your worldview a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. In addition to just building the diversity of the class, I think leadership is really important. So if your identity is a pathway for you to be a leader in your community, business schools definitely want to know about that. Speaking from a small school, they were looking for the next leader of the LGBT organization, and now that's me at Cornell, and now I'm looking for that next person as well. So it's not enough to just check the box, it's more about how you've utilized that and how you've helped others.
I would agree. I think also, speaking about why diversity is important, I think it's part of being who you are. Authenticity is important. We like authentic leaders. We look for authentic leaders. We want to develop authentic leaders, and we want to be authentic leaders. And diversity is part of who you are. It's part of your experience. It's part of what you bring to the table. And so if you are hiding any part of that, regardless of what kind of you identify with, I think it detracts from you as an applicant. So I think being out in the process and forming a diverse class is part of how schools can build great leaders.
I usually have a three-part answer for it, and some of that has been covered with you guys. One part I think is that authentic self. So the reality is, both with your time at school, as well as once you go back into the workforce, you're going to spend more time with your classmates and your coworkers than you are with your immediate family. That's unfortunately a very sad fact. But because of that, you want to be able to be yourself. You want to be open and honest, and there shouldn't really be anything holding you back in that, because you are going to be spending so much time with these folks either in school or in your future career. I also think, kind of to what both of you said, that there's kind of the diversity of thought factor, and so as you think about a really robust education, part of that is understanding different viewpoints. And so when you're in business school, you're going to get viewpoints from people who come from different ends of a political spectrum, who have different experiences because of their intersections of diversity. They might be a person of color who has had things happen to them that you can't even fathom happening to you. It might be an LGBT person who at some point might have been kicked out of their home. These are experiences that you might not have had, but because they add kind of a different vantage point to every discussion that you're having. And then the third is, realistically, you're going to business school to further yourself, further your career, and a large chunk of what you'll end up doing is related to recruiting. The blunt reality from my viewpoint is that I strongly believe, in part because it's a lot of what we do, that companies really are seeking very actively, they're seeking diversity. And so they come to things like our conference, they participate in things like Consortium, MLT, National Black, Pro-Spanica, because they're looking for candidates with diverse backgrounds. And so because of that, you're essentially opening a door. So yes, your school is going to open doors for you. I don't want to discount that. You will have alumni that will be able to get you in places. But to the extent that you can broaden your network while you're in business school, that's the smartest thing that you can possibly do. And so, by being part of a community like the LGBT MBA community, which we can talk about kind of people's various experiences with that, you're able to open some of those doors that you might not be able to through your own school's network. And so you want to give yourself every advantage possible. I don't know, I'll kind of piggyback off of that. I don't know, from your time when you were in business school and even now, like, to what extent has identifying as LGBT, having that network, furthered you, helped you, given you access to something that you feel like you might not have otherwise had? Anyone?
I'm trying to think of how to answer that question. It's not like if you're open, you're the go-to person. So they're not,
Right.
People aren't like, that guy's the guy, you need to talk to about that. But I think something I've noticed is, I think being open or just allowing people to know that part of me, people respect that. So you could go to school, you can kind of just stay underneath the radar, no one ever know. Obviously, it's not something that I advertise, but when people find out, it's because it's not a usual topic of discussion. But I think that they respect the fact that I'm confident, I feel confident in myself, and I'm willing to share, open up and share that with them.
In addition, when I went to my interviews at Cornell, I didn't actually talk much about my orientation because it just wasn't top of mind at the time. But what actually happened through informal networking, through reaching out MBA, and through some other avenues, I met senior leaders at the organization, at the company that I'm working at now. And now that I'm here, in this internship, people are surprised that I know the head of marketing or whoever, and it's really exciting because I was able to meet them in an informal setting, and then now that's really benefiting me now here in my internship.
I would also add that there are, so I live in San Francisco, I'm an alum, And here I've found I work in technology, so there's a lot of women in tech groups. There's Lesbians Who Tech, which is a wonderful community as well. So there's a lot of, I think, for my career and my industry and how I identify, a lot of good resources and networks out there that has been really great in getting me mentors, getting me even peers who are in the same career as I am, who I can kind of connect with and understand what kind of professional challenges they're facing. All of those resources, I think, have been very valuable.
Yeah, I kind of echo that. Like, I'm kind of amazed, actually. So I've been out of business school now for 6-7 years. And I'm closer to other LGBT people I met at other business schools than I am to a lot of my own classmates at NYU Stern. And it just so happens that, like, it's a tight community, but, like, everyone's always helping each other. It's like another alumni network. And so that's a reason by itself that I would say just don't discount it as you start your journey, because I think it can be a really powerful tool if you tap into it well. I guess, since we're on, everyone's here thinking about admissions, so you're thinking about applications, business school, all of that, like thinking about your own process, your own time in school, or what you see now as an alum, like what do you think is going well? What do you think people should look into when they're considering schools? What do you think your school did that was amazing for this community, or frankly for any diverse community? Just that you can share, and pointers that you can give to folks watching that they should consider as they go through the process.
I'd actually really want to recommend visiting each school that you're interested in. This is a pretty big investment on your behalf. Business school is costly, even if you get a scholarship. So it's worth the time to go and visit, and you don't really get a sense of that community unless you actually go and spend time with that community. Another thing that I did when I visited all the schools was I would reach out to the clubs, so whether it was the LGBT club or say there's Asian clubs, Asian American clubs, or even finance club or consulting club. All of those clubs have people who have students who are really interested in speaking with applicants. And it's part of getting a feel for how community is built in that school. You're going to spend, 2 years or so with that community. Do you really want to put, that much money to work in a community you don't feel part of? So I would definitely say visiting the schools is the number one thing I did that made me feel like I knew where I belonged. And I think a lot of these schools also have great welcome weekends. They put a lot of time and effort in supporting welcome weekends. So when you get in, I would also recommend going to welcome weekend, where you have a very large exposure to not just current students, but also other admitted students who are going to be in your class.
And then as an alum, are you still engaging? Are you kind of helping in any of those initiatives? What does that look like at Wharton?
Yeah, I loved Wharton. It was a community that I was just so fond of. Most of my friends out here in San Francisco are from business school. About 150 people from my class moved out here, so it's a very big portion of my class. I speak at a fair amount of admission events for Wharton because I do want to talk about how great my experience was. And we have third-year drinks, which is alumni drinks every month for the community. I would also say MBAs in general have been very friendly to me as I reach out. Every time I've interviewed, even if I haven't gotten an interview, an offer at the end of that interview, I very often have very senior product leaders reach out and say, I noticed I have an MBA too, I have an MBA as well. I'd love to get coffee with you and help mentor you as you start your product career. So that has been really, really amazing to have access to not just my own alumni network, but feeling like there's a larger MBA family out there.
Yeah, and I can jump in on that as well. It's really clear to me that visiting is one of the best ways to understand if you're going to feel comfortable at the school. And I think this goes across any aspect of your identity and any intersections therein. you might be at a school where you're one of the only people that look or, act like you or come from a family that you did, or you might be one of like 2 or 3, and if that's what you're doing, you need to go and see if the rest of the community is going to be welcoming. And at Cornell, I felt really great about that. And I am one of 2 out women in my class. And we are good friends, but that's pretty small, proportion. So I was really happy to meet her at some of the events ahead of time. And I also was really happy to experience 3 or 4 days there in which I met my future classmates, and I already felt comfortable. And this was actually pretty scary for me coming from the Bay Area, where I felt very safe and very much like the majority here, actually. And going to another place where I was suddenly representing my whole, community. Having to answer questions sometimes, but then, understanding that they were authentic and people were coming from a good place and they were really excited for me to be there. I didn't feel tokenized at all, and that was really important for my decision, and was not true when I went to other schools. So, you have to go and see how it feels for you personally and see what role you want to play. Do you want to be, quiet and not out, or do you want to, are you okay with being the only one and having people sometimes ask you funny questions? You got to visit.
I think that's, I'll kind of add to something that you said there. So statistically, we know, we do a study, a survey every year where we try to gauge self-identified out LGBT students within student bodies. And on average, we survey about 45 schools. It comes a little under 5%. It's like 4.7%, which is actually a huge increase. Back in 2013, we were about 2.7, so that's a pretty big growth within that period of time. So that's on average, and you do have some schools, a great example is actually Yale SOM, tends to pretty massively over-index, and you have some that under-index. But there are some things that you forget about. So like if you have a class of 100 people, and it's 3-5%, you're talking about 3-5 people, whereas if you have a class size like that of HBS, you're talking drastically different numbers. And so I think going there, getting a vibe for what's it like for the current students, and I have found that any current student and really any alum generally is pretty happy to be pretty honest and say, here are the things that I thought were great, here are the things that I thought were not so great, even though they kind of are pretty tied to their school, they're also generally pretty willing to be honest and say, here's what my experience truly has been.
Yeah, so whenever you go to business school, you're going to end up, I'm a part of several different groups, whether they're affinity groups or just like my core team group or the people that I went to Portugal with before school. But it's just good to know that you have some sources of support. And so the LGBT group provides that, but so do other groups. And what I've noticed at Sloan, and I don't know if it's like this at other schools, but we do a pretty good job of, I don't know, sometimes it kind of frustrates me a little bit, but we're pretty good about making sure that we're just not clumping together. We try and get around and associate with all these, different, people from other different groups or other connections that we might have. So, like I was saying earlier, we can continue to broaden, but you just know that you can always go back and depend on those people from our LGBT group.
Excellent. Thinking about, so let's talk about the groups and kind of like what life actually looks like. From your own experiences at your schools, like what are the cool, amazing things that are going on within the LGBT community or other intersections that you've had? Like, what are unique experiences that you've had or had in kind of the past that you feel like are worth sharing so people have a sense of like, what does this mean once you get on campus?
Okay, I'll jump in since you're looking at me, Matt. I was really pleased to be one of the inaugural ROMPA Fellows at Cornell and work with admissions and our Office of Diversity and Inclusion to represent my school and to, go join events with Reaching Out MBA. I promise it's not just a huge plug for Reaching Out MBA, but I love this organization. And it was really cool to be in the beginning of something like that at my school and to help shape it. And I felt really proud of Cornell that they had made that investment. It came with a financial scholarship as well, which was helpful, and came with like a very public commitment to being dedicated to the community. So it's been really exciting to be, especially at a smaller school, able to be in the leadership of that and to help form it this year.
There was a group of us from several different schools that got together and took a trip during one of the long breaks. So just imagine, this group of, 40 guys and some girls in there, just hanging out down in Miami, having a good time. And so I think that just speaks to the broader MBA community. You're just going to be open to meeting different people and finding opportunities to try and meet as many people as possible. But so far, in my MBA experience, that's probably been one of the best memories that I have of being able to connect with so many people from different schools.
Yeah, I would say our LGBT club is the largest, I believe, of all business schools.
Yeah.
Wharton has about 600 members of our LGBT MBA club, which includes a lot of allies, mostly allies at 600. We throw the largest social events of the year, the two major parties. Everyone comes and supports it. We also have an event called Pub, which is every Thursday. The entire school gets together and spends time, happy hour basically, but it's sponsored by different clubs every Thursday, and so it's differently themed. One of my favorite events at Wharton is the Rainbow Pub, where our faculty as well as our administrators dress up in drag, and they actually love the event. Usually our LGBT admissions event is also on the same weekend, and so we have LGBT prospective students join as well. But it kind of is a fun event that everyone comes together and enjoys together. Our administrators from, our deans are also in drag at that point. So it is quite a fun event to go to, and that brings the community together. So I would say as a school, we do a really good job of making sure that each club is highlighted, each club is supported. It's not just the club having its own events, but a lot of the clubs will have joint club events, and those are more of the very popular events. So we'll have, the India Club, and the LGBT Club will have joint events. We often have veteran happy hour with the LGBT Club as well. And so a lot of those joint events bring different communities together, as well as speaks to the intersectionality of identity. We should not be confused. It's obvious that there are queer veterans, there are queer Indians, there are queer women. So a lot of these clubs do have intersectional events, primarily because identity is complex, and many people do have multiple identities.
Yeah. Typically we find on campuses, clubs do really three types of programming. So one is that kind of social networking kind of fun, so like the Thursday night event. One is kind of educational, so it's educating your peers. So particularly as schools have had sizable international populations, there's a large learning curve, particularly on issues related to LGBT and also people of color, because some international students actually don't understand the complications there. Then there's also one of kind of, I don't want to call it advocacy, but like community engagement. So what are you doing as LGBT MBAs to interact with the greater community where you are? So are you volunteering with like an LGBT center? Stuff like that is a lot of what we see. One quick question, and actually two quick questions, and I want to go to the audience. So first of all, intersectionality already came up here. Easy, hard to kind of figure out how to navigate that? Like how everyone up here has different identities, different intersections. How do you decide what you're emphasizing more? Do you decide that? Like, what has that experience been like for you within the context of business school, not outside of it?
I think I have a very unique perspective on that. I was in the Army, was in under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So as you can imagine, you can't be very open, or I couldn't be very open. And just before I got out, that was probably the best year that I had in the Army because it was just out there. And so going to business school, I was very excited about being with, more people of color and people from the LGBT community. And at school, I know, I don't know, like, you leave whatever you're doing before school and you discover that you're a product of wherever you've been, right? So very much a veteran, and I feel like that's probably who gets me the most at school. And that group in and of itself is intersectional. There are people from different backgrounds in that group, and other folks that identify as LGBT. So I know I can always go to that group. And I don't know, I just feel like my personal perspective on it has been to just kind of, I don't want to be a guy that's just focused or trying to reach out to certain people. So, I just kind of go with the flow.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah. What I want to talk about a little bit is the coming from like the Bay Area and the vernacular that we use here and the level of kind of awareness of certain issues. It's different when you go in different places, right? So I actually had to learn to, be not less out, but I started to change how I spoke about my queerness, right? Because I was suddenly around people that were coming from the military and that had never been out before. They needed to be sensitive. Like, I didn't run up to them and out them, for example, in a way that I felt I could be much more comfortable and fluid here in the Bay Area. So intersectionality has been really interesting coming from California and moving to the East Coast in New England. But it's been great. It's been great for me to get that exposure because the Bay Area can be a little bit of a bubble, so it's been good. And then secondly, I want to talk about the ways that I can be an ally to other groups with other identities. So it was really important for me to not just fall into a certain smaller, community within the larger MBA community. And so I joined other groups like the consortium, for example, so that I could constantly be growing in how I could be a better ally and to look at my blind spots. And I have a lot of them. And so it's awesome to be in that conversation with people that are going through different things around identity and having opportunities to show up for them when I can has been really a really good opportunity.
I would say allyship is really quite, it is the probably strongest word through that builds community through business school. And I think a lot of the clubs do have joint events and spend a lot of time doing joint events because we're here to build community. We're here to build allies, regardless of whether those allies are queer allies or straight allies or allies of all kinds. Ultimately, I think the people are very willing to learn from each other and to build connections. I would also say that one thing I found was our schools are quite international, and where it was easy for at least me and many other similar people with American backgrounds, let's say, to be out in the process and to be out in school. I also did want to note that I know of international students who did not come out during their years at business school, primarily because they were concerned about returning back to their home countries and what that would mean. And so I also want to be very respectful of that experience as well and know that, not everyone has I don't know if it's a privilege, but not everyone feels comfortable coming out during business school and living that authentic, true self. That may not be still at this age available for everybody.
Yeah.
Something that I saw a lot of this year is, there's this whole diversity argument, and so you're saying, hey, when you're looking out at the workforce, you need a diverse workforce because of this whole, I can give my perspective, someone can give me theirs. And so something that I saw a lot of at Sloan this year and there's probably a lot more momentum with it going into the next year with my class. But the different affinity groups would join together along with their allies, and if there was an LGBT cause, we go to the Black Business Student Association or the Hispanic Business Association, and they would, gladly help, kind of rally the troops. The Ask Me Anythings, all these type of events. What we're seeing more and more of is, this bonding or assistance between groups, because it just bolsters this whole diversity argument, right? If you can appreciate a diverse workforce with more women, then chances are you're also going to see the benefits of, more people of color in your organization.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Last question that I'm going to ask, and then we'll turn to you. Particularly for the two of you, since you're closest to it, in the admissions process, so we now know through the admissions offices of the top 40 schools, I think it's something like 80% of them give you the option to essentially check a box, self-indicate by checking a box, or to indicate by essentially saying, I'm interested in this club, so you can sort of identify that way. So that's obviously one method that you can kind of out yourself in the application process, but if you want to go a step further, what would you recommend to people? How would you say, what would you say is effective based on your experience, based on now your better understanding, being in school? What's your recommendation there, particularly for somebody who may not have like a story that has bad components? Like that's something that I've had people say is, I didn't have a bad upbringing. Like everything was cool. My parents were cool with it. Like I had no problems in school. There's like no kind of tough story that I can tell in an essay. Like how do I do this in a way that's authentic, but like still adds more meaning in the application process?
So obviously you can check the box, right? I found it very interesting because going into that admissions process, I thought that would be something that I would talk a lot about going through Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And what I found is I didn't really talk about that much at all. But obviously they were aware that I was LGBT identifying. And I just feel like I had the benefit of not having, of just kind of being beyond that, which I think is what we're ideally going for is a future where it doesn't really matter at all, right?
Right.
Those methods are, whenever you check the box or whatnot, those are great because it just facilitates you meeting that community and that support team. But then you're going to have opportunities, whether it's like club day or whatnot, where they're looking for someone to run the table or whatnot. And so being that guy, because you're essentially wearing the banner of, hey, I'm LGBT identifying or whatever affinity group you're associated with, stepping up to the plate and representing whichever group you're from would be another way to do that.
Yeah, I had a mentor really push me to tell a little bit more about my story because in my first application, I hadn't put it in my essay. At Cornell, there's a question with chapters, and I was preparing my application, and my mentor was reading over it, and he was like, "I feel like you left a chapter out," and I was like, "Well, I didn't know really what to say about it," and because I didn't have a bad, coming out process, I was very well accepted. It was great, so it was like I didn't really know how to incorporate that. And so my advice now to others that have a story to tell with their application around a section of identity is, again, back to leadership. So one of the things that I did was I started like a yoga class for LGBT folks in my community in my hometown in Sacramento. They loved to hear about that because it showed leadership. It showed that I was like out in the community, that I was teaching and speaking, and I was kind of on stage before, and so there was things that were really relatable, and it was less about me coming out and more about leadership.
Great. All right, so questions, yeah.
So I have like just like kind of two separate questions.
Yep.
One is, so just kind of to follow up on exactly what you're talking about right now, when you do have something that you want to explain, how do you balance kind of TMI and kind of being authentic, telling a true story? Because, for me, like my undergrad GPA I took a long break from college. My undergrad GPA was great, and a lot of that kind of structured around the coming out process. And my second question is, let's answer that first on the second one. But how do you kind of find that balance in the application process of trying to, provide this authentic story, but then kind of
I would imagine that, so they read your essay, right, and then you go into the interview, and they're fully aware of what you've written. And I think whenever you write your essay, the crazy thing is these essays are becoming smaller and smaller, so it's really hard to get a lot of information in there. You just want to always come across as authentic, so that's just the start, right? Like, you have to think through it, right? But you want to make sure that they're seeing the real you, and then you want to carry that over into the interview. So, you just expand on it a little bit.
I would also say, business schools want introspective applicants. They want leaders who understand their weaknesses, right? But have done something about it. So you're not going to be able to hide certain things. Like, you can't hide if you don't have a quantitative background. You can't hide that. You can't make up a major, right? But what you can do is you can take quantitative classes when you're applying to business school. If you don't have any quantitative background, you can take steps to understand if you have any weaknesses, if you have anything that might come across as a weakness. You can say, this is what I've done to remedy, or this is what I've learned from these challenges. These are the challenges I've faced, and this is what I've done with them. And I think that not only shows, it's not a weakness ultimately, it shows growth, it shows development, and it shows you are a candidate who understands what your experiences have given you, and this is what you now can give to the business school community. So I wouldn't frame it as a weakness. I would frame it as really a challenge that you've grown from, and I think that would bring a lot of depth and a lot of strength to your application.
Yeah.
I remember the other one.
Okay.
So I come from a legal background, and so it's interesting watching the legal kind of industry become more diverse. And they have this NALP, which is a governing body of legal professionals, and everything's transparent. So you know exactly how many LGBT people you have at any law firm, how many you have at each law school, and so all of this now. I think a lot of it's been driven from these companies who now hire, GCs who are hiring the firms, are looking for diversity. To me, at least from my experience, it doesn't seem that the business world has had as much of a kind of transformational change to the same extent.
Yeah.
So what's driving the change at the business world?
So I think slowly but surely you are seeing it on the business side. I think the difference is that when we're saying business, you have to think about these giant corporations. So think about it's not a great example because they actually are involved with this, but Google, giant company, right? Versus some law firms which are smaller, a little bit more measurable. There's always this trepidation to kind of advance or push people to do something new, and then you have people who are of different generations who say, well, I don't want to self-identify, and I'm afraid that's going to let me be fired because I work in this state. That's a lot of what we see. I think the reality and why on the business school level, I actually think the business schools are starting to become a bit more progressive in some ways than some of the companies are, is because the companies are trying to become more progressive but need the pipelines, and so business school is inherently a pipeline for that. I will say, if there's anybody from GMAC that's watching, the thing that would help the business schools more than anything else is to include a self-identifier on the GMAT test, which has been something that I think we've talked about for 5 years now, and so that's probably the next big step forward for business schools, honestly, is getting something like that where there's just a source of information. But for the companies, I think it's all about pipelining. Yeah.
Out of the top 20 MBA programs, who do you think, or which schools do you think are the most ethically, have the highest ethical standards and the most diverse student population?
I'm sure you're all slightly biased. Opinions on that?
I can rep Cornell a little bit here.
Sure.
Cornell appealed to me because it was always in their mission to be open to any person. The motto is any person, any study. So when I looked at the Ivy League institutions, I was really struck by that. They were the last one to join that, that 8, but it was because they saw a need for opening the doors to more people. And that really spoke to me deeply. So that's more of a personal thing for me, but yeah, I don't know the actual data point you're looking for though. Yeah.
I think there are data points, though,
There
right?
are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you release the percent?
We do. So we publish a report every year. We actually haven't published the one for the most recent year. It's going to go up, I think, July 1st is the date that it's scheduled to go out there, just because this year it took us a little bit longer to pull together the information. For us, I will say, it varies a little bit year to year. There are some schools on LGBT, because that's where I probably am most knowledgeable, that are pretty consistent. There are some that are like super variable, and where you see the variability often is with smaller schools, and it goes again to the, if you have 3 versus 5, like that's a 2% difference, which is, in this case, actually fairly significant. There are also some weird trends, which I know, Vivian, you and I have talked about this, so like LBT identifying women, there tend to be like clusters, and it tends to kind of move around from school to school, so it's not necessarily always consistent. So like when Vivian was a student, I would say like Wharton was like the place to be an LBT woman. I would say this past year it probably was Chicago Booth. And that I can't necessarily explain that, other than I think when people go to a place where they see people who are like them, that tends to kind of attract people, whether that's current students or whether that's other applicants.
I'd also say, like, the percent women is a pretty, like, data that should be widely available. We're still not at 50 yet for any school, but there are some schools who have persistently been in the high mid-40s, no, low mid-40s. I think the highest percent was 44%, and that was Wharton a few years ago. So I will put in a plug for Wharton as being very women-friendly, but 44% is still not 50, and it's still far enough from 50 that every school still has work to do.
Yeah.
When you were kind of picking schools to apply to and ultimately deciding where to go, how did you weigh like LGBT community, diversity, feeling comfortable with all of the other facets of business school, like industry match, opportunities, alumni, things like that?
I would say like geographic diversity, like where the student body goes, where the network is, was very important to me, as well as class size. So if I went to a school of 200 people, I didn't know, and I wanted to move to the West Coast or stay in the East Coast, like would a school with 200 people have a large enough network for me in the future? And so you can also get a sense for geographic diversity. I would ask the student, the admissions office for that kind of data, how many people from the graduating year ends up on either coast or internationally. A lot of these schools do have that statistic. And I think for me that was pretty important, knowing that I would want to spend some time on the West Coast, but eventually also move back to the East Coast.
I think for me, it was probably geography, and then, I feel like most of the schools kind of have that thing, their it thing. And so for me, I did engineering undergrad, and I kind of wanted to be in that environment, so that's why I was attracted to MIT. And then next, kind of what Vivian was saying, since I knew I wanted to do finance, I'm out here on the West Coast now, so I know it doesn't make a lot of sense, but my thinking was I'm interested in finance, probably better to be closer to New York City, so.
Cool. I think we are at time, but we.
I have some questions.
Sure.
Quick question. First of all, when you first fill out the application, how many schools did you pick when you first fill out the application? How many MBA school program or school did you pick for the first time?
I did 5
About
5
5.
schools.
And then I have another question is when you write down when you ask for ask people to write a recommendation letter, if I apply for MBA, is it better for ask people from business world to write
I would say who knows you best, like who can actually talk about you.
It doesn't matter if it's a business school or any other.
No, the whole point of, in my opinion, the whole point of your statement as well as kind of your recommendations is to give a picture of like, who are you? Like what makes you tick beyond like what's obviously there in terms of a GPA or past work experience. And so whoever you think can help tell that story, like that's who you should definitely be using.
My last question, I do have some friends finish MBA. They told me, some people told me MBA can help them get a better job, better pay job. Some people told me MBA doesn't help them anything. They actually end up doing something else. I don't know. I mean, I haven't applied yet. I don't know from your guys' experience, is MBA really help you get a better job, easy to get, I mean, higher pay, or just, just this is a degree? Because I was hearing different stories from different friends. They were saying to me. So.
Vivian, I mean, what's your opinion on that as an alum? Do you feel like it was helpful?
Yeah, I'm a career switcher, and I wouldn't have been able to switch careers. I was an investment banker. Now I'm a product manager. It was difficult enough as it is with an MBA. I can't imagine having been able to tell that story and make that switch without an MBA.
Yeah, and I would actually echo that. Like, I think it's, if you're a career switcher, if you're looking to advance and grow within your industry, I think those are certain areas where I would say it's almost guaranteed to help you. I do think that there are certain industries where, it may help you, it may not. For example, social impact, like that's a great example. We do see a lot of MBAs going into it. I think it may help them get into more of kind of the upper administration, but I think, it's going to depend what sector of social impact, and if money's the important thing, it may not help you that much, but it may help you be in a leadership role. And so I think that there are pros and cons and things you have to weigh there.
These three people sitting here, are you guys from which school, you guys?
I'm from MIT.
Cornell.
Wharton.
I'm an NYU Stern alum.
Okay, last question. So MBA is prepare people to be a manager of a company, or just prepare people to be in this business world after you get an MBA?
I think it's a longer answer, but my very quick one would be that immediately after school, I think it prepares you essentially to be a middle manager. I don't think it's necessarily setting you up immediately to go into kind of the upper echelon of management, but I think that it is an important stepping stone on that path.
Will MBA teach students how to manage their own business, something like that?
It can. It depends on the program. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll be up here if you have other questions that you want to ask the panel. Thanks so much.